Hi, I'm Harold Munro, editor-in-chief at the Vancouver Sun and Province, joined by our legislative reporter, Katie De Rosa in Victoria. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Harold. Happy Monday morning.
Yeah, same to you. So we're less than 2 months away now from the June 30th deadline that the province imposed on municipalities to overhaul their community plans to meet the upzoning and other land use rules that are brought in by the NDP government. And you checked in last week with a few municipalities to find out how this process is going. What did you learn?
Well, so the municipalities are sort of in the process of updating their community plans, but another target that they're required to meet is the housing starts that were created through the Housing Supply Act. That's another NDP piece of legislation that aims to take control away from municipalities and really try and dictate how many new homes they have to approve. And so we're 6 months into that since the targets were given September 30th. And municipalities have to check in with the province at the 6 month mark. So that's the 6 month mark is already passed. So the municipalities, the first 10 that have been selected, have to basically give their progress report to the province. So we have heard from 4 of those municipalities. They issued staff reports: Oak Bay, Saanich, Delta, and Victoria. And the first 3, Oak Bay, Saanich, and Delta, are all falling behind their targets. For example, Oak Bay has added just 7 net new housing units in the last 6 months, and they were supposed to hit 56 net new units in the first year. So they're quite off from that target. The only municipality that's exceeding the target is Victoria, which in its staff report boasted that they've actually surpassed their 1-year target in the 6-month period. So Victoria is saying, we're flying, and the other municipalities are admitting we're falling behind. But the staff reports from Delta, Saanich, and Oak Bay all seem to say we're trying. So they're almost trying to blame the external forces like interest rates and building costs. So saying, we're approving as much as we can, but the developers are just moving a lot slower. A lot of projects are on hold. So we are waiting for the next 6 municipalities to submit their 6-month progress reports. But probably likely that they're going to have similar results, that they're also going to be falling short from those targets.
Right. Vancouver was on that list too, weren't they? That's one we're waiting for.
Yes, so I haven't seen their report yet. So big question mark as to whether they're going to hit those targets.
Right. There does seem to be a bit of a difference, or a bit more of a challenge, when it comes to some of the suburban municipalities that are perhaps struggling with this new approach. Whereas like a more urban city like Victoria doesn't seem to have a problem. Is there a difference there?
Well, again, I'm sure, like towns like, for example, Oak Bay, they said we don't have a lot of, open land. So a lot of it is infill, which is why you might see small, 1 or 2 units, a garden suite or a basement suite, but not a lot of opportunity for, a high density property. But again, people will say that Oak Bay has really said no to any sort of apartment buildings or multi-unit homes in residential neighborhoods. So a lot could say that Oak Bay has not created the conditions to welcome any kind of higher density buildings. So that's might be why developers are just saying we're not going to go there, because they figure it's going to get rejected, even with these new bylaw changes that require, multi-unit homes. So I would love to, be monitoring Oak Bay and see if they actually approve any kind of, say, 6-plex on a single-family lot. But that would be big news for Oak Bay, I suppose.
Right. Okay. So the ones that are falling behind, what under the legislation, what is the province going to do? Or 6 months in, is there any steps they're going to take or could take?
So the legislation says that if a municipality is falling behind and they don't believe that it's forces that are out of the municipality's control, if they believe that the municipality is actively blocking some of these developments, they can appoint an advisor, so a provincially appointed advisor, to sort of help them along. And then the advisor would be able to see if they're actually making genuine progress. And only after that fails would the province actually exert more control and perhaps take over bylaw, completely change zoning, take over more land use decisions. So that again is the stick that the province holds, but they're saying they want to use the carrot first. So they want to try and use, potential benefits like amenities funds from the province and also from the federal government before they have to get into completely taking over zoning. So, I guess I think it. To be honest, it will be interesting to see what kind of force the province uses, because we have these targets. If municipalities aren't meeting them, is the province going to crack down, or is it going to kind of use more of a soft approach at first?
Right. So thus far, no consequences that you've seen.
No consequences
brought on any of these municipalities that are not meeting the standards. So that either suggests that they're reluctant, as you say, or that it really is forces beyond their control, the municipal control. It's interesting because these targets are set, but the provinces, or as I said earlier, the municipalities have until the end of June to implement the new legislation, which the province thinks is going to supercharge housing development and improve affordability, which we know that everybody has a stake in this. If you're a renter or an aspiring homeowner, then you're looking for that kind of increased affordability. And if you're an existing homeowner, then you're concerned about the impact on your street, I guess, and everything from parking to school overcrowding to services, et cetera. So these thresholds, targets were set for the municipalities, but they were set before the legislation takes effect. So
there's several pieces of legislation. So the Housing
Right.
Supply Act that set the targets has already passed, but the June 30th is connected to the upzoning legislation. So the requirement to create missing middle housing, so the sixplexes. So there's 3 different pieces of legislation that require municipalities to dramatically increase their density, and the other one being the transit-oriented density. So high rises near SkyTrain stations. So there's a lot of moving targets. So there's a lot for municipalities to have to change basically to meet what the province is asking of them.
Right. So isn't that going to, like, by the end of June, if municipalities have their new community plans in order, isn't that going to push Oak Bay, Saanich, Delta a lot closer to their targets, at least in theory?
Again, it's in theory, but we have to just see how it plays out. Like, have they created the conditions to sort of welcome this development? So, again, we'd have to look at each official community plan, what they have, allowed for within that community plan, and if it's ambitious enough to open the door for some of those multi-unit homes. So that could be the piece that kind of, like you said, accelerates the housing supply. But we have to look at what each municipality passes, and I mean that's a huge feat. There's hundreds of them, so just trying to see that they're all keeping pace with what the province is setting. That's going to be another bureaucratic minefield, really.
Right. Now, they're not going to be able to deny it, though, right? The way the legislation is written, they're not going to be able to deny a 6-unit or a 4-unit development on a single family lot, depending on the size of the lot.
Again, in theory,
or even hold a public hearing on it.
Municipalities, like, look at the Surrey policing. Like, we've seen municipalities that have, not played ball. So that, I think that's going to be the test. Is in the legislation says they can't deny it, but there's a lot of municipalities that say, like, for example, I know in Langley Township, the mayor has said he's going to find a way to have public hearings because he doesn't believe in the province telling municipalities that they can't have public hearings on rezoning. So again, we'll have to see if the municipalities are actually going to comply and what would happen if they don't.
Right. Oh, wait, that's a key point too. What happens if they don't? Certainly, ultimately, the province carries the control, right? Because municipalities are creatures of the provincial government, so they could weigh in. But the question also is, how aggressive do they want to be with a provincial election coming in October?
Mm-hmm.
They may not want to turn off local residents over that kind of issue until after the election.
Exactly. Yeah. So Again, I think a lot of this is uncharted waters in terms of the province taking over control. And, again, it's going to depend on if the municipalities are willing to accept that kind of top heavy control.
All right. And then, of course, the other big issue, municipalities have weighed in on this one as well, but it's a provincial federal jurisdiction, is decriminalization. I guess we're waiting for the province's request to the feds, waiting for an answer.
Yes. So basically, it's been more than a week since Premier David Eby announced that the province would be going to the federal government and asking for amendments to its decriminalization exemption to the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. So what BC is asking is for Ottawa to put in that exemption that people cannot use drugs in bus stops, in doorways, in most public spaces, basically. So, possession of the drugs is still decriminalized, but you can't use them in certain areas like a park or a beach. And the premier said that would address some of the open drug use concerns that we have seen. But so we haven't heard from Ottawa, but we should be hearing soon about whether Ottawa will accept that request. But in the last week, it's really led to some intense debates in the House of Commons in Ottawa. The federal Conservatives have been saying this experiment is not working and the Ottawa needs to just scrap it completely. It really seems like Ottawa is just trying to put this on BC, saying BC asked for decrim, we're giving them what they wanted. They have the 3-year pilot project, and if they've asked for these amendments, I would guess that they're going to accept those changes that BC's proposed, because they don't really want the responsibility for this. They want this to be on BC.
Well, and in fact, Eby wanted to amend this on his own, and the courts shot him down and said you couldn't do that. So, is there anything? I mean, I know you're not a lawyer, but if the feds go ahead and amend it, is that going to be enough to satisfy the courts?
I mean, the premier was asked that, and he said he's confident that would withstand a legal challenge. Again, I don't know. I'm sure any legal group could go after Ottawa and
Right.
perhaps sue them, but I think the premier's banking on perhaps that's more onerous to take that case to Ottawa. So he is hoping to get around the legal challenge in BC by putting the ball in Ottawa's court. So it really seems like both sides are kind of trying to pass okay, we're going to put this on Ottawa, and Ottawa wants it to stay in BC's on BC's shoulders in terms of the responsibility for it. But again, I think the premier is quite confident that if the federal government amends the exemption, that it would survive a court challenge. And it kind of gives.
He was confident before, right? He was confident before, and then shocked that the courts didn't agree with them. But I'm a bit surprised he would be that confident, because the principle is the same, whether it's federal or provincial. As I understand it, the argument was that if you don't have enough safe places for people to use, then you can't deny them the ability. So does it now put the onus back on the province to open more supervised consumption sites?
I mean, I think advocates have been saying that, even for years, that there's not enough safe places to use drugs, and that a lot of the safe consumption sites don't allow smoking, don't allow inhalation. So that's a major barrier. And again, that's perhaps what we've seen in hospitals, where people are harm reduction as a theory is accepted, but there's no kind of safe place for people to actually smoke drugs. So anytime there have been proposals for safe consumption sites in certain neighborhoods, there's been opposition to that. So that's really a tension that's playing out here, is that, we want to have designated spaces for people to use, but there's opposition to even those spaces being created. So that's a big challenge for the province, for sure.
Right. And then the thing that potentially the unintended consequences of such a legislation or such exemptions would force people to do this away from the view of others, and then they would overdose overdose and die without intervention. And I think that's the concern, right, of the harm reduction nurses and
Yes,
others.
exactly. I mean, I know Vanju, when I've spoken to them previously, even when the provincial legislation was proposed on banning open drug use, he's basically said this could kill people. This could cost lives. So it's very much opposed by advocates who say, like, again, like, this will push people into the shadows and will increase the overdose rate. So it's the overdose crisis again is no signs of abating, and deaths keep going up, and so it's a really difficult balance to figure out what is going to actually reduce deaths. And I think BC United has called for free treatment beds and more treatment beds. So there's
that does still, we come back to that. That does seem to be the missing piece. We saw that in Oregon and Portland, right, where they ran into problems with decrim, and they replaced it with a system whereby, you can have your drugs seized and you can be fined, but you're given an option, and an immediate option, to get treatment. Now, I don't know whether that's truly available there, but that's the kind of system they've talked about here. So if you simply amend the legislation to allow police to seize drugs and prevent consumption in public spaces, it doesn't get at the core issue of what where those people are going to go next. There's no place for them to go.
And well, again, even in Oregon, there were, I would say there's more treatment options than BC has, but a lot of people didn't take them up. So yeah,
yeah, because they weren't being pushed to it. The argument was they're simply being given a card with a phone number, but there was no real sort of incentive for them to go. Like no carrot stick approach, if that works, right? I mean, but there doesn't seem to be anything that's being brought in here that the police are the police going to direct them to treatment when they take their drugs, or are they just going to leave them on the street to go out and find more money, however they can find it, to buy more drugs?
Yeah, again, I think it's like, I know the premier has said, he doesn't agree with forced treatment. He had actually floated the idea in the past, but he's since walked away from it. So no sort of system of forced treatment, which, again, a lot of experts have said is not necessarily effective either. So yeah, there's a lot of pieces missing in the opioid crisis that are. Again, decrim is not a silver bullet, and I think even the chief coroner, Lisa Lapointe, had said that at the time. But I think the other pieces are certainly missing.
Right. All right. Thank you. Well, we'll watch for your coverage of whatever answer we get from the federal government, hopefully this week.
Thanks, Harold. Take care.